Good evening and welcome to Living Waters, falling deeper in love with God's Word. I am one of your hosts, Lauren Cruz.
Shabbat Shalom. I'm Stephanie Pavlantos.
That's right. Shabbat Shalom. It is not dark here yet, but we are starting to have shorter days. So
Definitely.
Yes, and we finally broke 90 degrees, and now
that's good.
It's only 85 degrees now.
Wow. Yeah, we've had in the 60s lately. Yesterday was cold and rainy because it was only around 60 degrees, but today went back up to 70, so that was kind of nice. But it's been just fall weather we get up here.
That's great. Have your leaves started turning yet?
Yeah. So not totally, just like the tops of the trees. And
yeah. I love fall. It's my favorite. And I know I asked you earlier, but are you doing anything for Sukkot? How are you celebrating Sukkot?
Yeah, so we didn't make ours, but we did buy more like a gazebo style tent. And actually, once the program is over, we're going to set it up, get it all ready. So we're having a group of people come tomorrow morning for a small service, and then we're going to celebrate throughout the day. And we kind of, we just kind of have a big potluck, and we play games. We kind of plan some games ahead of time and that kind of thing. So, yeah, when we did Rosh Hashanah, it was fun. We just had a really, really fun time. And so we were hoping that tomorrow works out the same way.
That sounds great. Good luck, and I hope you have great weather, and I hope you enjoy the time with your friends, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we are continuing through our book, The Epic of Eden. The Epic of Eden, a Christian entry into the Old Testament. And I have to say, after last week's very long chapter 5 this week was a nice reprieve. It was much
Definitely. I finished it by Monday. I mean, I just started reading it on Sunday, then I finished it Monday, and I'm like, oh, I guess I'm done with this already. Yeah, I was expecting something longer.
Exactly. So this week she is talking about the final intent and the New Jerusalem. And she was really kind of setting things up. There were a few things we didn't really get into at the end of the chapter last week. And if we have time today, I'd really love to just kind of go back and take a look at it. And, again, she kind of starts out with some very, just kind of covering some basics of things. We who have studied the Bible may recognize some of this. It wasn't terribly new information, but very good reminders and very good information to put things in perspective of,
right.
We read over things in the Bible so quickly and we don't even really dwell on them. Like, there's a reason for that, and for example, she begins by talking about different iconology and different iconography of Eden. And she begins by talking about 3 icons that we have learned about: the cherubim, the trees, and the rivers, and what those things represent in the Bible. And to me, this is something I really enjoy because I often say, like, God gives us a word and a message and we just see the tip of it, but it's packed with layers of information. And not that it's a secret revelation or anything, but it just packs a punch, and it packs such a deep meaning that we can either settle with what we see on the surface, or we can take the time to dig a little deeper and try to.
Because even if you took the cherub and then you just followed it through Scripture, used a good Strong's concordance, and you would see that, it's kind of like what we talked about before, the law first mentioned. So when you see it somewhere in Scripture, you go back to the first time. And of course, that was the Garden of Eden. And when Adam and Eve were thrown out, and the cherub, kept that them from entering back in. And so it's important to notice things like that when you read Scripture. It does help you kind of do just a topic search, right? Like, just go through and look, because the cherub were mentioned again, not only in Exodus but Revelation, and they have a purpose every time they're mentioned.
And they're not mentioned so much that it would just take you forever. Like, you can look up cherubim and you can just look at the couple of verses that they're referenced in, and you can get a good understanding. I loved, she really said, what do you imagine when you think of cherubim? And we so often think of this, the fat, happy little Cupid style angels. And she really begins by giving us a vastly, almost fearful understanding of what these beings would look like.
Right.
She describes them in the book of Ezekiel. And let's see if I can find it real quick. And this was their appearance. This is on page 122, and we can back up a little bit too, because I know I'm kind of bouncing around in the chapter, but they had a human form, so that they have a form like we do. Each of them had 4 faces, 4 wings. Their legs were straight. Their feet were like calves' hooves, and they gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings, their 4 sides were human hands. As for the face and the wings of the 4 of them, their wings touched one another. Their faces did turn when they moved, did not turn when they moved. Each went straight forward. And as for the form of their faces, each had the face of a man. All 4 had the face of a lion. And on the right, the face of a bull. And on the left, all 4 had the face of an eagle. And so, they were kind of terrifying creatures. It wouldn't be something you would necessarily want to run into. I love that, because also it kind of gives you the idea of the size.
Right. And this, of course, it was in Solomon's temple. This is how large he made them. But in the tabernacle, they would have been like the smaller on top. And it represented that there was a throne.
Well, it did. And we'll talk about that. But also next to you, on top of the Ark of the Covenant, much, much smaller version of that cherubim, and they would have been much grander, much larger. So Stephanie is referring to, again, God did not use something brand new, right? The image of this cherubim being part animal, part human, part angel, part, all these different animals. This was actually an image that was widely understood and accepted to represent a king's throne, and it was often used. These I guess idols or carvings were often used as part of the throne that the king would sit on. She makes a reference to how these beings were carved into the gates of Susa and Babylon. And when I actually I want to say New York, she mentioned the British Museum, and when I was in London, that's the only museum we didn't get to. But when I was in New York, there was an entire room section of Assyrian art from King Darius. I mean, there was all kinds of amazing artifacts, and some of the artifacts were just huge wall reliefs with these carvings in them. So other cultures and other nations they may not have the Bible to read or the scriptures to read. They very much had an understanding of the fierceness of this being, and they used it. They used it. One of the things she didn't really mention, and I thought this was interesting, because when you go back and if you take a look at where these beings stood or were present, they were always present as a symbol of the king. We said that. But on the Ark of the Covenant, they stood and their wings hovered, and that is the location where God dwelled, right? His holiness dwelled and met with man between and under the wings. So the purpose of the cherubim is to cover the presence of God. And she didn't go into this too much, but think about the tomb. Like we can see it beautifully on this image of the Ark of the Covenant. But if you go into John and you read where the angels were standing at the head and at the foot of the body of Jesus. And so,
and the offering being there, the blood, because that's where they put the blood between them.
And the presence of God would have dwelled between them, both in death and in the resurrection. And so, think about that, how, even if you just continue, it doesn't specifically say that they were cherubim. It does say angels. And we only have the idea of cherubim, seraphim, and then the archangels. So it had to be one of the three. But we have that. So I think that's interesting. And I wonder if this might be the idea. And I don't know. We always think of a guardian angel. A lot of people have that idea. And we know that the scriptures say that God, he will give his angels charge over us. And we get the idea of having a guardian angel. But if you think about it, where does the presence of the Lord dwell now? Like, he dwells within us. So to have a guardian angel, or to have an angel that has his charge over us, would make sense, because the presence of the Lord dwells within us. But what's important is our loved ones, when they die, do not become our guardian angels.
Right. They do not become angels at all.
They do not. They have already been appointed. They have already been created. And our loved ones, I'm sorry, they are not our guardian angels.
Right. So, and she talks about the Ark of the Covenant, of course, the laws there, the tablets, and of course that's in, I think you probably said, and she did, of course, but it's in the Holy of Holies. And we also see those, if you lived at that time and you were a priest, you would have seen the cherubs on the curtains that went into that.
She spent a lot of time with that. I thought that was nice.
And she shows the layout of the temple in here, and this is just a little bit of an artist drawing of what that would have looked like. But you see the curtains. There was a curtain that separated the rest of the temple or tabernacle even into the holy place, and then you have the Holy of Holies, and this was the only thing in the Holy of Holies. That's
right.
And we just finished Yom Kippur this week, and so that's where he would have gone and put the blood for the atonement. So
right at this timing. Exactly. Okay. Anything else you want to mention about the cherubim?
I think you probably said this already. Just things I have marked about them being well known. I think you mentioned that in the Mesopotamia, and so and I think that we can't show this picture because I didn't have access to it, but that there's artwork and there's different things that they've uncovered where they're carved into the throne.
I don't know if that
there it is. Yeah. So they're actually carved into the throne where maybe a king or a pharaoh sat. So
exactly. Yeah. And she makes the point. She really needs, on page 124, she really says, Yahweh is repeatedly described as one enthroned above the cherubim. And she has that in quotes. 2 Samuel 6:2, 2 Kings 19:15. First Chronicles, Psalms, Isaiah, all say this. That's a phrase that is repeated. And it seems that our archaeology has provided us with a picture of what the Bible is describing, that the Ark of the Covenant was to serve as the actual throne of Yahweh.
I thought it was interesting too, because she mentions that that they too, speaking of the cherubim, so they were intended to defend the great king from anyone who would attempt to enter unworthy.
Exactly.
So that was pretty cool. But so there was reason to be slightly afraid.
A little bit. So. Okay, so she moved on from angels, cherubim specifically, to trees. And I've always, Gail Heaton. Gail Heaton is another author that has presented shows here on the Messianic Lamb Network. She does Through Ancient Eyes, and she's got a couple of new books out going over the portions that we read for each year. And she has talked a lot about trees and what an incredible symbol a tree is in the Bible. And that's a symbol that I haven't really put much investigation into, but the more I learn about it, I mean, it's just thick with some really interesting symbolism and meaning and repetition. So I like this one. You want to introduce trees?
So she says here that, of course, in First Kings 6 and 7, and she kind of introduced, or she talks about the verses there, but Solomon carved all the walls of the house around about with carved engravings of cherubim, palm trees, open flowers, inner and outer sanctuaries. And so she repeats this. It was on the doors of olive wood. He carved the trees, the palm trees. He carved it and even overlaid them with gold. So we constantly see how they are throughout the temple that Solomon would have made, but they were also probably engraved in the even somewhere in the tabernacle and everything. So they were, of course, and I'm going to show this, but of course in the temple, the menorah represented that tree that we think of when we go back to the Garden of Eden, and that it was the tree of life.
That's right.
And that's what was represented every time they carved it into something. They were bringing back the essence of Eden. And and I think that's why this chapter, we have to understand the New Jerusalem is his final intent. That's what this chapter is called, because he is taking us back to the garden.
Right. And I think she started out the book just saying how important the idea of garden is, and gardening for kings, because it basically represents them as, a gardener, and as powerful as God is, because, they would have these lush gardens to show them as the king and creator. And so I think, although we know Solomon had a faith in Yahweh, he too had extensive gardens and used this repetitive symbol all throughout. And so the menorah, and I don't think we've really even thought about this, it was to represent the tree of life. And,
yes,
we've got branches, we've got buds and, flower buds. And if you've ever read the description of the menorah, and think about too, how large it is, right? Like we all have little tabletop menorahs, but this was, and even the picture here, it's, it's only about as big as a man. But in Israel, in the Temple Mount area, they had menorahs on the four corners of the temple that were massive. Like you needed a ladder to get to the top of those. And so they would have looked like huge trees.
Right.
So she did a great job of explaining how it fit into the Holy of Holies, how it fit into the temple. But then she gave us a really good, and Stephanie, you alluded to this, the whole idea of going over these images of the original Eden is so that we will recognize them and understand their place in the New Jerusalem. And she finishes, the chapter, we'll get to that, by really saying, God's first plan is God's last plan, and how we should begin to understand what heaven and the presence of being in the presence of the Father is really going to look at.
Yeah, I think that we kind of, I was even talking to someone yesterday, and I think it's almost like we think that God changed his mind, like, oh, that didn't work, let's try something new. But everything goes back to Eden. Everything within the scriptures alludes back to Eden and that perfect relationship that he wanted to have with us. And that is heaven. Heaven on earth will be the perfect relationship that we will have with him when he dwells with us, and he is our temple. I think that's even cool, because we talk a lot about the temple here in this book even, but it says in Revelation, he will be the temple.
He will be the light.
Yeah.
Right. We won't even have a sun and a moon because of the presence and holiness of God. I don't know how many times, especially growing up in the traditional church, I would hear a pastor saying, like, I can't wait to go to my mansion that's being built just for me. And I'm going to have a banquet table and I can eat anything I want because I'm going to have a glorified body. And I'm going to walk through the streets of gold and just, and you paint a picture of this very foreign, lofty place. And over and over again, the New Testament says, beginning with the scriptures, right? Paul preached based on the scriptures. Jesus, shared the gospel, the good news based on the scriptures. And we forget the scriptures was the Old Testament. That's all we had. And to have the understanding of, I must go to in my Father's house, there are many mansions. It's not that. It's we have homes because he has left to build us an attachment to God's house. We're not getting our own mansion. Yeah. We're getting an addition to the temple. My glorified body. Well, that could very well be a spiritual state that, sometimes Jesus presented himself in the flesh and sometimes he presented himself in the spirit. Regardless, we're still present, right? We still have an essence to us. Doesn't say anything about eating. Does say a little bit about streets of gold, but really it's in description around the throne of God. It doesn't mean it's a city, any different really than Jerusalem. And we do have the measurements of Jerusalem. We do have what's inside of Jerusalem. And she actually says that within Jerusalem, we will have trees for the healing of the nations. And she actually gave us
which is in Ezekiel. Yeah.
Ezekiel 47. And just listen to this and then let's think about the future. And if you hear any words in here that sound similar. So it says, by the river on its banks, on one side and on the other, all will grow all kinds of trees for food. I mean, that sounds right out of Eden. Their leaves will not wither and their fruit will not fail. I mean, that to me sounds like Psalms 1:1, right? The leaves will not wither. The fruit will not fail. It will be prosperous. Everything he does will prosper. They will bear every month because their water flows from the sanctuary and the waters that are coming from the throne of God. That sounds very much out of Revelation. And the fruit will be the food and the healing, their leaves for healing. And that to me is almost a quote of Revelation where it says that the tree of life will be the healing for the nations.
Yep. So it's same thing found in Ezekiel 47, starting in verse 12 is found in Revelation. He repeats it.
Right. It's the same words. Yeah. So, I know that Revelation is always put as a prophetic book, but it's also a very Jewish book. And the original audience would have absolutely understood every reference and would have heard the echoes of scripture within it.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And so the Bible, Revelation says we're going to get a new heaven and a new earth and the new Jerusalem and the new land, honestly, of where Israel will remain forever.
Yes. So, did we start rivers yet? Because I'm like,
we have not.
Because that's all in with the rivers as well. So everything you read is on page 126 and 127 about the rivers because they all tie together. The trees are on either side of the river.
Rivers, right?
And the main river that comes out of the throne.
And what do we call our show? Right? Yeah. Living waters. Right. So literally we'll have the living waters and the rivers. Yeah. Yeah. I kind of skipped over a little bit on the rivers.
Well, it's everything you read. So, everything that we see it repeated, like everything you read in Ezekiel is then repeated in Revelation 21:22, so to speak. Because, behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them. So that's him being the temple. He is that. He is tabernacling, right? He's dwelling among them. And then you go into everything with the river. I mean, Ezekiel talks about that river coming out of the throne room, going down to the Dead Sea, and either side is lined with the tree of life. So there's not just one.
Not just one. I know. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And the tree of life is what we were to eat from originally in Eden, to give us that that was not a tree that was prohibited from us. We were to partake. We were to eat that and preserve our body, to preserve our life. And so it's interesting, like there's going to be multiple trees available to us when we have the new creation and the new heaven and earth. Another symbol, like she didn't go too deeply into this, but I thought it's interesting. Trees often represent a place of judgment. If you think about Deborah always judged from underneath a palm tree. If you think of my brain, Andrew, who was the one that was sitting under a tree?
Well, it was Nathaniel, but the way I heard it, it was more like an idiom, right? So he was studying the scriptures underneath the tree, sycamore.
So he was studying scripture. He was judging and understanding and going over the scriptures. And so it would have been an idiom of thinking through and judging things.
Yeah, right? And what Jesus was saying, I saw you studying the scriptures. I saw you studying the law underneath. And understanding, learning about it. So, that was kind of how they put it. Let's go sit under a tree, and that meant we're going to go study the scripture.
We're going to go study, right? And then finally, ultimate judgment tree is the cross. The cross, was made out of a tree, and that's where we have the ultimate judgment that was done through man.
You could go crazy on trees because. Well, number one, the word etz it can mean in Hebrew tree, but it can also mean log, wood, beam type of thing. What we might and so that's that. There's multi things. So sometimes when the King James talks about he hung on a tree, it could very well be a cross because the tree, same word for just even the wood. So. Or a branch, and a branch was thrown into the water at the time of Moses to sweeten the water that was bitter. So there's lots of references to it.
So coming up ahead a little bit, I got up to page 129. It seems like I underlined a whole lot on that page. And you've said this, the city will have no temple because it will be the house of God. And so, think about that, because we often jump on that verse, I'm going to go and prepare a place for you. And in my Father's house, there are many mansions, but really what we're doing is he's preparing the temple. He's preparing his dwelling place is where his home, his house, his bet.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
And before you move too far, 127, he says what John is describing here in Revelation 21 is what Christians call heaven. The biblical author is describing heaven as a new earth.
Right.
The garden has been restored. The primordial deep or chaos has been defeated. And Ezekiel's city temple is being lowered from the heavens to serve as a residence of the redeemed. So that whole picture is just beautiful, but we kind of want to, like heavens and earth, and, it can be very confusing of what's being spoken of and where all this is happening. And so I think it's interesting that when we will think of heaven, it's the New Jerusalem. It's what he's bringing down. That's right. But it will be on earth.
Yeah, it will be here on earth.
But the earth will be purified. It'll be
which is great, because she really talks a lot about, and again, we didn't talk about this too much. We kind of stopped before we got to the end, but she very much spent a lot of time explaining and helping us understand what it means to be in Adam, right? Like being in Adam and what redemption truly means. It's not just Adam and the ancestors of Adam being redeemed, but the entire earth is being redeemed. And she spends time talking about how, it's groaning, and
she did.
Described as groaning, and
that whole passage in Romans, talking about the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. The earth, and I was explaining this to my husband in the car on our way to church one day, because we don't think of it, but the earth was meant to give what we wanted. God had set it up so that the earth just gave us this produce. It gave us the food we needed. It wasn't as though we didn't have to plant seeds or whatever, but it gave us everything we needed. And when the land was cursed, then the ground couldn't give us what we needed anymore. It wouldn't grow. It would grow all the thorns and thistles and weeds, and instead of what it was made to grow. Mm-hmm. And that's where the curse comes in. And we were going to have to work hard to make it give us what we needed, or we'd starve if we didn't work.
And so follow that through to all of creation. So the earth is corrupted now and diseased and lacking. Mm-hmm. And so is man physically. Like, our bodies were made to heal themselves. I heard a great talk on this. It was a woman who very much embraced holistic medicine. Mm-hmm. If you cut your finger, you don't freak out because your body is going to heal. You might make sure you wash the wound and you dress it or something, but you don't panic because your body will heal that wound. Mm-hmm. And we're now facing disease and all kinds of things that our body was made to recover from. Right. And we don't recover.
Yeah, you don't want to get me started there, because
well, and yes, take medicine, but medicine is not meant to be our life-sustaining thing. We're not
food, good food.
Right. It's eating the produce. It's eating clean. It's eating what the earth is supposed to produce for us.
Yes.
Taking medicine as an emergency just to get us through a crisis situation, then not be on it for the rest of our life. We're not supposed to take that medication to sustain us for the rest of our life. But the earth has failed, and we have failed as stewards, because now we're not, even the food that our food line is producing is not nutritionally.
They're no longer in the ground.
No, and she gave a great example of 20 years ago, you could eat an orange, and today you would have to eat almost 20 oranges to get the same nutritional value as that orange 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so we can't depend on the food that's being given to us, right? It's important to eat as clean as we can and get back to the basics of Eden if we're going to take advantage of any kind of healing for our bodies. Yeah. But ultimately, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be the way it should be.
We have to supplement now, because
we have to because things are not the way they should be. Mm-hmm. And maybe one day, if we live long enough, we'll get to experience true food and true health.
But it'll be the way God said to eat too, right?
Yeah.
It's all this food we call, let's not food. Everything we put in our mouth that we think is food is not.
Yeah.
It's not going to be around. So if you have a problem with that, just know.
Well, I just
go back to eating healthy, good food that God created for us.
I'm looking forward to it. I live daily with pain. Like I have a constant pain in my hands and my back and it's inflammation, and it's I don't have arthritis, and it's I do have Hashimoto's, and so that messes with my nerves and everything else, and I can't even imagine living without pain. And so to me, I don't care about the banquet that they're offering. I would like to live pain-free.
Exactly.
And experience my body with the strength and the health that it was designed to have. To me, that would be amazing.
It
would
be. Yep.
Yeah. All right. I guess I'm off my soapbox. So that's the final intent. So on page 129, she goes in that God's original intent is his final intent. Mm-hmm. Like, just because man fell and sinned doesn't mean God's plan changed. He still wants to dwell with us. He still wants to experience health, and he still wants to enjoy that we call it labor, but the farming and the cultivating and the caretaking, and he wants, that should be a joy for us. And so he still wants us to have that.
Yeah, I love this on 129. How do we get Adam back into the garden? In Genesis 3, humanity was driven out. In Revelation 21:22, they are welcomed home.
Right. And it says Adam is a creature. Look at this. Adam is a creature, right? Humanity was not designed to float around in the heavenlies, as is so often portrayed in popular theology. No, Adam was designed for Eden.
For land.
So even living here where we live now, we are not designed for this. We were designed for Eden.
Yeah. And I think also how I hear that too is just that no floating on a cloud with a harp. We were designed to be on the ground. We were designed to still planting the vineyards but it won't be work.
It'll be a joy.
Yeah,
it'll be a joy. I'm looking forward to it.
Yep.
Because I still can't grow carrots.
And I think the thing that she also keeps talking about is this is a rescue plan.
That's nice.
Yeah.
So
that was a good phrase, good way of thinking. I mean, from after Eden, after he had to chase us out, so to speak, because we're Adam, so he had to now, how am I going to rescue them? How am I going to bring them back?
She gave a wonderful, there's probably a couple of pages she did this to really help us understand.
Yeah, think page 130.
Yeah, she's think of a climber, right? A climber on a mountain falls and sustains some very serious injuries. And he can't get up and help himself, and he can't climb out of that pit that he's stuck in. And so, the rescuer has to climb down, strap him on, haul him out, get him out of that pit, and resuscitate him. And he's now in the hospital waiting to see if we're going to recover or not. And so think of us as that. We were climbing this mountain and enjoying it. We fell. We've injured ourselves to the point of, are we going to make it or not? Because right now, on our own, we're not going to make it. We are stuck at the bottom of the pit. We are trapped in a body that is still injured, and we can only recover because Christ has pulled us out of the pit, has graced us with the grace of resuscitation, and now we're just waiting to see if we're going to make it to enter into heaven and health. And
because there's all these steps.
Right.
All these steps to, she talks, like you said, I mean, rappelling down and then assessing the damage and then having airlift and then hospital, emergency room, all those are just where we are. I mean, right now, we're kind of in the, I guess you could say we're still in ICU to see if
we're still in recovery.
Recovery to see if we bounce back.
Right. She says God has been leading humanity back to Eden by means of a sequence of steps, a series of rescues, and a series of covenants. So again, it's not an old covenant and a new covenant and this covenant. It's like, I've given you this covenant, and then, okay, let's get you to the next step, and the next step of recovery. So if you think of it that way, I think it's kind of interesting to think of it that like these covenants are really just steps of recovery, steps of redemption.
It is good. That is good to think of it that way, because you're right. And this may seem off, but I can't help. It's off the topic a little bit, but I can't help it, because when I was looking up the number 40, it was explaining that 40, like when we see Moses, he was, his first 40 years he was in Egypt. The second 40 years he was in the wilderness, in the mountains, taking care of sheep. And then in his last 40 years, he was in the wilderness in Mount Sinai and with God and leading these people. And it said that 40 is that number that represents going to the next level. And that's exactly what we're kind of doing. they were in the wilderness for 40 years. He went up to the Lord twice and spent 40 days and 40 nights with him, so there's all these numbers of 40 within scripture, but it's always addressing a next level, in a sense of our walk and in these covenants of going. And I even happen to think, like, what happened in my 40th year, or what, and I can really look back and think and see where the next level happened. So it was very interesting. It's a biblical thing. So, but yeah, I know it's kind of off subject, but I couldn't help. It's like that rescue plan. There's our next level.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to jump ahead too much, but I did want to incorporate some of the things that she talks about. She did spend a little bit of time talking about the Moses covenant, and then Noah, Abraham, Moses, and then David a little bit, and then the one with Jesus. But on 134, when she really gets into the conclusion of what all of this looks like, and before I get there, on page 133, she's got a great example of why these covenants were so important and what they changed, right? They didn't nullify each other, but what they added. So you've got Adam and Eve, right? You've got one man. And then you get to Noah, right? And that's one man, but his one, change of saving that one. Actually, I'm doing it wrong. I'm saying it wrong. He originally made covenant with Adam for all people. That was supposed to be the relationship with all people. Then man fell. Then he creates a covenant with Noah, one man. He made the covenant with Noah. And then the next covenant was with Abraham, one family, right? His family, his immediate family. And then the next covenant was with Moses. And that's where a nation was created. The nation is called, and the nation is covenant with them. And then we've got Yeshua who comes, and then that ends up being the establishment of the church. So that's an incorporation of all people again, right? So we're back to all people again. So it took all this time to get back to this offer is for all people. We had to look backwards.
And she goes through, and I'll just bring this up because she goes through this whole system of people, place, and presence. And so we started with one people, Abraham, the first covenant was kind of, besides the Noah covenant, it was one people or one man, and making people out of one man. And then the place became Canaan, and then the presence of God being with. And so you see like these things playing out with each person. And she keeps talking about, this is the people. Now here we have the place, and now we have the presence.
Right.
So
that's a key repeated thing for the whole book. She says
it is.
Yeah.
Throughout.
So on page 134, in conclusion kind of thing, she says, in sum, redemptive history is all about fixing what went wrong in the garden. And we know that. We talk about, we know the whole goal is to overcome what happened with Adam, with the second Adam. So we go into that. But basically it says, thus, you and I stand guilty on two fronts. One, we are guilty because our forefather represented us in a sinful choice, but we are also guilty because we have followed our forefathers in that choice with all other individual choices. And then first we need a representative who will stand for us in making the different choice. And so because Jesus was man and God, the man part is so important for us because he provided that first Adam could have succeeded. Adam could have made a different choice. Adam had the power. Like we always think, well, Jesus was sinless because he was divine and he could, he knew better and he confronted Satan and he did a different thing. But by being human, he proves that Adam could have made a different choice. And then so that the children of Adam would not have to. And when Jesus rose from the grave, he defeated death. He eradicated the curse of Eden. So we needed him for two reasons, not just to justify us, like to show us that it is possible to overcome sin, but then the divine portion overcomes death that we experience because of sin. So it's important.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, she kind of, I have all that highlighted because I thought it was good. But she said, and just going backwards, but she said, what went wrong in Eden is what must go right in redemption. What was done in the garden must be undone in Jesus. Right. So and that's what she was saying, the whole thing. He undone it, so he undid what Adam started.
Right. She mentions this in the chapter prior, and this is really, I didn't want to glance over this so fast last week, but I know we had to. So she asked the question last week, why do bad things happen to good people? And, why is this world so messed up? And why do terrible things happen? And she says, this is on page 117. I backed up a little bit. It says the first part of the answer is that there are no good people, right? We, even Christians, we think like, oh, I'm a good person. I'm a Christian, because her answer to that is, but really the reality is that in comparison to what we were designed to be, we are a broken, twisted, evil race. The finest deeds among us, as good as I am as a believer in Yeshua, as good as I try to live a holy life before the Father, it's filthy rags.
Right.
And that's really, it's not, we use that filthy rags verse to say, like, oh, you can't be good because anything you do is just looked at as filthy rags. And we're saying that to someone else. But honestly, it's us. It's us.
And then, can I put something kind of TMI in there?
Yeah.
But those filthy rags were the menstrual rag.
Yeah. A menstrual rag. Yeah.
So
the second part of the answer is to do with the fallenness of our world. And so here it ties in. We're no longer ordered to go according to God's perfect 7-day structure. We're no longer subject to his ideal authority. This world is at war with itself. So why do bad things happen? Because this world is not anything the way God designed. And we still are following Adam's very bad choices. We are not eating from the tree of life. And we're still in recovery. We're still waiting to see if we're going to make it.
The nature of Adam's world is evil. Bad is now the norm. Is the way
bad is now the norm. Yeah.
We should not be surprised that in this fallen world, babies die, marriages fail. We should be surprised that some babies live and some marriages thrive.
Isn't that a sad statement? But it's true. Yeah, that's a sad statement.
Because we're selfish people.
We are.
And we're going to pick ourselves above somebody else every time. But that's not the Jesus way. He picked everybody over himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
And our world is, slowly coming to the point of the world as it is will end. Thank God, and people are fighting to stop that, but it's the design of the world. The world will come to an end as we know it, and God's world will be recreated.
Right.
But in the meantime, in the midst of this, the message is still the same. We still need to share the message of Yeshua and the redemption that he offers to us. He's our only hope.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is.
It's a good book.
It is.
Good chapters. You're going to learn here. You're going to learn a lot. And I think it's important to understand, in a sense, what the work of Jesus actually did, because he has to make everything, he has to restore everything. It's not just about redemption, even though that's a huge part of it, but it's also restoring. It's restoring that relationship, even our relationship with the ground and it's just amazing. So we still have a few minutes. We kind of got through things, but and of course, if I'll just read a little bit here. In some, in the work of Christ, the rebellious heart is softened, the choice is unmade, the broken relationship is healed, the curse is lifted, and the lost inheritance regained. All this because the second time around, Adam did not fail.
Yeah.
And that was like my favorite line in this chapter.
Well, I'm going to read a little bit more to add to that. This is on page 135. Thus, when you said yes to God at that altar rail, or when you knelt beside your bed, what you were doing was undoing the choice of Adam in your own life. Whereas Adam said no, the sovereignty of God, you said yes. What is the prayer? Because everybody's like, you got to say this prayer. It's simply, Jesus be the Lord of my life. It's bowing the knee. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. And all it is just understanding that, yes, God, this world is a mess. And yes, God, I do take responsibilities for my bad decisions and my war against you, because that's what we do. We're enemies of God before we become saved by God. And when we finally bow that knee, it's just simply saying, you're my Lord. You are the Lord, and I will tuck myself under you and I will obey you. It's a trust and obey type of situation.
This week I was trying to sleep 11:30 at night, and I told the story earlier on the podcast, but the Lord just started downloading these things into my mind, and it had to do with some teaching I'm going to be doing on Saturday, but I had to get up, and it's like one of those things. I threw my blankets off, and because I actually have a blanket at night, it's cool here. So I got up, and I'm like, okay, I have to write all this down. I'm never going to remember it. So as I was reading about Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, in the Jewish, the complete Jewish study book Bible, they put it as you are denying yourself. And some say afflict yourself on Yom Kippur, and we take that as fasting, but it was denying yourself in this version. And the first verse that popped into my mind is what Jesus said, deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow me. And what you were saying is all about denying ourselves. We cannot follow him. We cannot have a successful walk with Jesus unless we deny ourselves. And it's basically, we're living out Yom Kippur every day of our lives when we deny ourselves and pick up our cross and follow Jesus.
Well, think about it. If Adam and Eve had denied themselves, we wouldn't even be in this mess.
Yeah, because it's all about our desire takes precedence.
It is. Or to think that I know better, can do better, I can make, it's under control. And the same thing with Shabbat. The whole reason of Shabbat is rest. It is. But it's also to acknowledge I had nothing to do with any of this. I had nothing to do with creation. I had nothing to do with the provision of anything, my job, all this week I've worked so hard, but it's not of me. It's only because it's been gifted to me to handle and manage and deal with.
Right.
And it's not.
It's a land grant, right?
Yeah,
we talked about covenant.
It's
still a land grant. So this earth belongs to God. He can do what he wants.
Right. So interesting. It is. So I guess we should let them know. We have about 4 more weeks left. So we will continue through the month of October because we're at the last week of September. And we have 2 weeks that we're going to need to pre-record. Stephanie is attending the Florida Christian Writers Conference. And so we're going to pre-record for that one. And then I have homecoming football at our high school that I have to handle with my yearbook crew. And then my husband gifted us with some play tickets mean, he bought them back in the summer, so I didn't know when that would show up. So we're going to be busy in the month of October. We'll be enjoying that.
But some of our shows won't be live. They will.
Yeah, some of them won't be live. And it just made me realize, like, there's another show that I forgot about that I'm going to be out of town for as well, but we'll deal with it. We're also beginning to go through and consider what books we want to do next. So if you guys have any specific books that you have been interested in or questioning, we do have a few that we're kind of bouncing around. And so, we'll look at each other's books and kind of read through and make that decision, and we'll let you know real quick. But again, if you guys have anything that you would like us to study, or topics or books or anything like that, please let us know in the comments, and it'll give us an idea for the next show. Yeah.
And don't forget, Lamb Network has a whole variety of shows.
Yes.
Some new ones are upcoming, and they always have a prayer team. So if you have prayer requests, you can go to the main website and let them know your prayer request. But check out the other shows on Lamb Network. There's some good ones. So
yeah, and Mark, who is over the Lamb Network, has said that they're going to do a little bit of restructuring in the next couple of after Sukkot. They're going to start doing some restructuring. And so they really want us to begin tag teaming with some other guests and some other shows. And so hopefully that'll be something that we're able to do, whether we tuck them into the different book studies or we have guests on our show. And and that's another thing. If you have any connections with any folks that are Torah inclined or Hebrew minded, people that do podcasts, people that are authors, we're always interested in talking to different folks. So
yeah. So
okay,
we still have a few minutes. We
do. We have like 2 minutes. All right. So the next week we are going to continue chapter 6. This one begins to go into the covenants. And so she is going to talk about Noah and Abraham.
That's right.
Right. So I had a request from a viewer to explain about Abraham and his name. So do you want to do that real quick? I think I can do it in 2 minutes.
30 seconds? Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So Abram was originally known as Abram. And his name was changed to Abraham, and you put the hey in it. Hey was originally a letter that was identified as it was a letter that indicated ownership. It was used as a vowel, and hey was a letter that was inserted into the name of God, Elohim, and linguistics think that it was used by the Israelites to separate Elohim, to mark him as their God, as opposed to El, because El was the language and the name of God all over the country. And so when God called Abram and Sarah, he marked them as his by extending the hey into their name. So we have Abraham and Sarah. The same H sound is used to change their name and to identify them as his people, marking out his
put
people.
His letter in their name.
It is. He put his letter in his name, and the breath. And hey is also the breath. It's behold, and so it's usually referencing an image of the Holy Spirit. And so he breathed his letter and his image into them. So good stuff. All right, we're going to go ahead and pull out and run our banner. So thank you guys for joining us this evening. Shabbat Shalom.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugi,